Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. When we think of World War II, we often picture the battlefields of Europe or the Pacific. But what if I told you the war's impact was just as revolutionary in Africa, sparking a fire that would topple empires? For decades, Africa was a continent carved up by European powers, its people living under colonial rule. Then, a global conflict erupted, and everything changed. This is the story of how World War II became the unlikely catalyst for Africa's freedom. Before the war, Africa was seen by Europe as a vast resource bank and a territory to be controlled. But when war broke out, the continent's strategic importance became undeniable. The North Africa campaign saw fierce fighting across Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia as Britain battled Germany and Italy. Why? Control of the Suez Canal, the vital shortcut to Asia, and the Mediterranean sea routes were at stake. Africa wasn't just a battlefield, it was a crucial supply base. To fuel the Allied war machine, colonial powers turned to Africa. Over 1 million African soldiers were recruited, some volunteered, many were conscripted to fight for Britain, France, and their allies. They served in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Back home, African economies were pushed to their limits to produce essential raw materials like rubber, tin, and palm oil, along with food to feed the armies. This immense contribution, however, came at a great cost, but it also planted a seed. For the first time, large numbers of Africans were exposed to modern warfare, global politics, and a world far beyond their villages. And on the battlefield, they saw something that would change their perspective forever. For generations, colonial rule was built on a myth, the myth of European superiority. Europeans presented themselves as an invincible, master race destined to rule over others. World War II shattered this illusion into a million pieces. African soldiers watched as France, one of the world's great colonial powers, fell to Nazi Germany in a matter of weeks. They saw Britain, the empire on which the sun never set, pushed to the brink of defeat. They witnessed European soldiers bleed, cry, and die, just like anyone else. They saw white soldiers depending on them for survival. This created a profound psychological shift. The question began to echo across the continent, from the barracks in Burma to the villages back home. If Europeans can be defeated, if they are not all-powerful, then why must we be ruled by them? The myth was broken. The idea that colonial rule was a natural order of things began to crumble. This mental shift was more powerful than any weapon. It was the beginning of a revolution of the mind. When the war ended, these African veterans didn't return home as the same men who had left. They came back with military training, leadership skills learned under fire, and a newfound political awareness. They had fought in a war supposedly for freedom and democracy, and now they wanted those same rights for themselves. They had been promised a better life for their service, but often returned to the same old discrimination and lack of opportunity. This sense of betrayal fueled a powerful desire for change. These veterans became the backbone of a new political class. They weren't just soldiers, they were clerks who had learned to organize, dock workers who had seen the global flow of goods, and drivers who had connected distant parts of the continent. They had seen the world and their place in it differently. Future independence leaders like Ghana as Kwame Nkrumah and Kenya as Jomo Kenyatta were profoundly influenced by the anti-colonial sentiment that surged during and after the war. World War II didn't just create soldiers, it created political actors ready to demand their freedom. The war also transformed Africa's economy, but it was a transformation built on exploitation. The demand for African resources skyrocketed. Production of cash crops like cocoa and groundnuts was ramped up. Mines worked around the clock to extract gold, diamonds, and even the uranium that would later be used in the atomic bomb. This led to the rapid growth of cities, ports, and railways. But this development came with a dark side. In many colonies, forced labor was common. Taxes were increased to fund the war effort, placing a heavy burden on families already struggling. And here's the crucial contradiction. Africa's economy was expanding, but the profits were flowing straight back to Europe. Africans were working harder than ever, but they weren't seeing the benefits. This created widespread economic resentment. Workers began to organize. Labor strikes, which had been rare, became more frequent and better organized as people demanded fair wages and better conditions. This economic struggle quickly merged with the political fight for independence. With the war over, the world was a different place. The great European powers, Britain and France, were victorious but economically exhausted and deeply in debt. They no longer had the wealth or the political will to maintain their vast, expensive empires, especially in the face of growing resistance. A new world order was emerging, led by two new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both were, for their own reasons, officially opposed to colonialism. The US championed self-determination, while the Soviet Union saw colonialism as a form of capitalist exploitation. This international pressure, combined with relentless protests and political organizing within Africa, created a perfect storm. The dominoes began to fall. In 1957, Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African colony to gain independence. The floodgates opened. In 1960 alone, 17 African nations declared their freedom. Nigeria, Congo, Senegal, and many more followed. Within a decade, the political map of Africa was redrawn. World War II hadn't just weakened the colonial powers. It had accelerated the decolonization process at a breathtaking speed. A key part of this story is the rise of organized labor. The wartime industries, the mines, the ports, the factories brought together large numbers of workers in urban centers. Living and working in close quarters, they shared grievances and discovered their collective power. They formed trade unions to fight for their rights. These unions became schools for political organizing. They learned how to mobilize people, how to negotiate, and how to challenge authority. It was a short step from demanding better wages to demanding self-rule. In many countries, these powerful trade unions evolved directly into the first nationalist political parties, forming the organizational backbone of the independence movements. Of course, the end of colonial rule didn't mean the end of foreign influence. As the Cold War began, Africa became a new chessboard for the global rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both superpowers vied for influence, pouring in aid, striking deals, and propping up friendly regimes. So while formal colonial flags were lowered, new, more subtle forms of external power dynamics emerged, shaping the continent's politics for decades to come. The war also triggered a profound cultural and identity transformation. African soldiers and intellectuals who had been in Europe witnessed the horrors of Nazism and its ideology of racial supremacy. They drew a direct line between the racism they saw in Europe and the colonial oppression they faced at home. This connection helped fuel Pan-Africanism, the idea that people of African descent, all over the world, shared a common struggle for dignity and freedom. Thinkers and activists began to frame their fight not just as a local issue, but as part of a global struggle against racial injustice. African identity became deeply political. It was no longer just about one's tribe or ethnic group. It was about being part of a continent-wide and even worldwide movement for liberation. Let's take Nigeria as a quick example. Thousands of Nigerians served in the British Army. Back home, wartime demands and heavy taxation created hardship and fueled discontent in growing cities like Lagos and Ibadan. After the war, this energy was channeled into politics. The nationalist movement exploded. Leaders like Nnamdi Azikiwe, Obafemi Awolowo, and Ahmadu Bello rose to prominence, articulating a vision for an independent Nigeria. They built political parties that mobilized millions, leading directly to Nigeria's independence in 1960. The path from World War II veteran to nationalist leader to founding father was a common one across the continent. So, let's put it all together. Psychologically, the war shattered the myth of European invincibility. Politically, it gave rise to a new generation of trained and aware African leaders. Economically, it created both growth and resentment, fueling labor movements. Socially, it led to urbanization and the formation of powerful unions. The final outcome, a wave of independence movements that swept across the continent. In the end, World War II did not single-handedly free Africa. Africans freed Africa, but the war made colonialism impossible to sustain. It exposed the hypocrisy of European powers fighting for freedom abroad while denying it in their own colonies. It empowered Africans mentally, politically, and socially, giving them the tools and the opportunity to seize their own destiny. In many ways, the fight for Africa's independence didn't begin with the protests of the 1950s. It began on the battlefields, in the factories, and in the minds of the millions of Africans who participated in World War II. Thanks for watching. If you found this look at history insightful, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that change the way you see the world.